We're going to continue our conversation about direct digital marketing by talking about more email and mobile marketing. In particular, we're going to continue with mobile marketing. We're going to discuss some more text message marketing or SMS marketing. So I'm going to walk you through some things that you should consider doing. Let's just call it tips or do's and don'ts. And the obvious stuff is because of the media, because you're using text messaging, you're dramatically limited when it comes down to the message length, and that's going to have an impact, obviously, in how we're going to craft the message. So be very cognizant about what you put in there because you only have so much space to deliver the message, right? That is the first thing. The second thing is for you to understand that at the end of the day, you're interacting with the customer, and the same mantra that we have discussed for marketing in general applies to the messages that you send to the customer as well. So the value that you are providing through the text message needs to be apparent to the customer. Otherwise, because this is a very personal form of communication, and there is a chance that they are going to be rather upset about the communication. So you need to make sure and that the value is there and that it's clearly perceived by the customer, not just by you, right? Third, and this is super important, you need to have an opt-out option. This is going to further limit the length of the message that you can deliver, right? If you only have 160 characters and the end of that message needs to be used by your opt-out option, that's going to make being concise and make sure that you write an exceptional subject line. It's going to make it absolutely essential, right? But make sure that you don't take the shortcut of forgetting about the opt-out option. You always have to have it there, okay? And it's good practice to make sure that the people that want the messages are getting them. You don't want to have upset customers that are getting your messages because you're spamming their email, or in this case, their text message inbox, right? Okay. Moreover, speaking about the same aspect, the way you should get the list of messages, sorry, the list of potential customers to send messages to should be carefully crafted, right? That database, you're much better off having a small database of people that actually want the messages that are really, really large database of or list of email addresses and names that are essentially random and they don't have your permission to send any messages. So to do this, we're going to use a few a few tools to make sure that we clean up that database and that we only have what we need to have. One thing that we're going to do is we're going to be very careful about segmenting the list. What I mean by that is any variable or any information that you have about these customers or potential customers, you should use to customize what messages you send to them and how that message is crafted. Right? We'll talk some more about this in the next slide, but making it personal and making it as valuable as possible to the customer by only sending messages that they are of interest to them. It's going to increase the chances that they will actually receive the message positively. And the second thing is we're going to use some testing. I'll talk about this towards the end, but it's a good idea to try different things with maybe randomly selected groups of people in that list and compare the difference, and then obviously use the versions of the messages that are working better in the group, right? Where you try something different. Okay. Another aspect that you need to consider carefully is when you send the messages, okay? Obvious stuff that is common sense, right? Consider the time where people are sleeping, right? So obviously don't send a message at 3 in the morning, right? I think that's common sense, but just in case. The second thing is don't send messages when people are really busy, right? So there are some times of the day, and this varies by culture and country, so you need to do a little bit of market research on this. But here in the United States, for example, there are some times in between that might actually be more likely for people to actually open the message, right? So you're going to have to do some testing maybe and or gathering information about habits so that you can actually see when you're better off sending those messages. That's one thing. Second thing is, depending on the type of message, the day of the month might matter, right? For example, if most people get paid at the end of the month, right, and you're sending a message that has an offer with a promotion, for example, money is probably tighter on the third week of the month than on the first week of the month. And you should expect to have different click-through rates and different conversion rates depending on this. So you should be wise about what message you are sending when. Okay, not all goals are created equal, and based on that, you should actually pick the time of day and the day of the month accordingly. Okay. And then another probably obvious thing is that if you have a call to action in your email, the landing pages associated with the call to action should be mobile optimized, because the person that is seeing the SMS message is seeing their SMS message on the phone. So if they're going to click in a link or a button so they can go and do something, like, I don't know, request a free brochure or whatever you have in your call to action, right? The landing page associated with that, right, needs to be mobile friendly. Okay, this again might require some more testing on your part. Okay. Now, what further considerations we should have when it comes down to the design of the actual message? Although I think I've already given a few tips. One, probably the most important aspect of the message, although not the only one, obviously, it's the subject line. Right? Because that's going to determine to a really large degree, although not only, but to a really large degree whether they actually open the text message or not. Okay, so spend quite a bit of time crafting the line. Again, it's a great thing to test. You can have different subject lines and send them to different groups of people and look at the opening rates. That's going to tell you pretty quickly which one of the subject lines is working better. Okay, because they are all coming from the same address, which actually matters, right, when it comes down to the opening rates, right? We'll talk about a couple aspects on that later. That's number one. But number two, if you see any differences, it has to be because of the subject line, right? So what can you have in your subject line? Again, right? It needs to be general enough that people are interested in, right? It is usually a good thing that these are basically crafted as a question oftentimes, right? A question that is compelling to the user, obviously. So this should be subject matter specific to what you're doing, right? It needs to be a little bit of a surprise, but not too much of a surprise. It's a balance, right? It's a difficult balance between providing enough information in the subject line so that they will actually be interested, but not providing so much that they don't need to look further at the message. Okay. And sometimes you can be very straightforward, and that might work for you. It depends on your product and your target segment. So sometimes having just a very clear limited time offer subject line might just be the ticket, right? Don't need to get tricky / complicated. Okay. Another aspect that I think I already hinted at is personalization is very important, right? So if you have the name of the people in your email list, or in this case, in your SMS list, use it, right? Now that might require you to do more work, or it might require for you to get specific software that enables you to use macros to basically send semi-customized SMS messages. Okay, good. And something that some people really like, I have mixed feelings about it, but I think you should be aware of it, is that there is plenty of evidence in the literature that if you create a sense of urgency, right, this fear of missing out or FOMO, and people are more likely to act on things, right? Fear is a powerful motivator, right? So if you create scarcity, if you let people know that this is going to end on Friday, right? So they have until Friday to do whatever you're asking them to do, and then probably your click-through rates are going to get higher, right? And I have mixed feelings because when you're always playing with fear of missing out, some people just get tired of it, right? I mean, this fear is a negative emotion and it's sort of tiresome to keep getting all these messages about how I'm going to miss out if I don't do something. So maybe I just shouldn't do business with you altogether. So in the long term, this urgency might actually reduce loyalty rates, which is problematic, right? But in the short term, it works, that's for sure. Okay. Again, be very clear about what you want the customer to do, especially in an SMS message. You cannot be beating around the bush. You need to just directly say what it is that you need to do. So be very clear and upfront and simple. Text yes to receive your discount. Okay, you know the customer knows exactly what they need to do. It's unequivocal, and if they're interested, they will just go ahead and follow your call to action, right? And this call to action can obviously involve links and landing pages. Okay, and if you're using links in SMS messages, remember to use a URL shortener to do, because you have such a limited space that if the link takes a lot of characters, you're not going to be able to deliver the message properly. Now, there used to be a lot of free URL shorteners before, but most of them now require you to at least put a credit card on record. They might have some that they might enable you to do only a few a day. Okay. Again, this is necessary if you're going to be doing this. So this is a tool that you might have to pay for. Okay. Okay. And then again, remember that SMS is a very personal channel of communication, and because of this, setting expectations is very important, right? And also, don't keep the frequency of messages so high that people get tired of them. Okay. And again, we've already talked about timing considerations, right? Timing of the day is important both for respect purposes and also to increase the rate at which people open the messages. Okay. Now I was talking about customization in the previous slide. Let's say a few more things about it. The obvious way of customizing your message is to use the information about the customer, right? And that might amount to basically details about the contact, right? Like the name, right? Okay, that's obvious. So the message will be customized if it says, "Hi, John," instead of saying "high value customer," for example, right? Now, every piece of literature is clear on this. If you use a personalized message, the opening rates are higher and the click-through rates are higher. So whenever this information is available, use it. Okay. Now, the customization should go beyond just the name. What do I mean by this? Use all the information that you have available about the customer to customize the message. What does that mean? Well, if you have a past history with the customer in terms of sending messages to this email or SMS account, you should actually use that information to see what messages work better or worse to this particular SMS account. So if you see that most limited promotional offers work really well, keep sending more of those, right? Essentially what I'm saying is you should use predictive modeling to decide which one of the messages or message features have a better chance of being opened and lead to conversion when it comes down to each of the customers that you have in the list, and you should use that information in your advantage. That requires for you to use some analytics and tools, right? A lot of this stuff can be done even in Excel, but it requires some finagling. Okay, when I say Excel, Google Sheets, right? If you want to get fancy in your modeling efforts, you can get a solution from a provider online that does this, and they will help you. Or you can go to more sophisticated software that is free, but it has, let's say, a steep learning curve, like for example, R. Okay, and there are others. It's not limited to that. The nice thing about R is that it's free. The downside is not easy to use. Now, when I'm talking about customizing the message based on their past history, this includes everything. If you have purchase history, you should use that information so that you actually send messages about the products that they have bought in the past, or the ones that they have bought more frequently if you have a long enough history with the customer, right? And if you have a large database of emails, you can actually cross-pollinate this customization by looking at similar customers for which you have histories, right? So for example, using demographics that you might have information for everybody to predict their past history, and based on that, decide which one of the products should be featured in your SMS message, and what type of message you should send, and when should it actually be sent. All this information can use some customization, and we don't need to send every message at the same time about the same product and to the same people. Now, obviously, with all these things that you are doing, both for email marketing and text marketing, you should follow up with what you're doing to see whether you are achieving your goals or not. The first step in this is deciding on the metrics that you're going to use. Now, like we have said in the past, there are many metrics that you can use, and not all metrics are created equal. It really depends what your goal is, and the metric should match the goal as closely as possible. Okay, now here you have a few metrics that are good candidates, but they are not all created equal, and you should pick one or two, as opposed to looking at many things and not really knowing whether you're doing a good job or not. Okay. First, you can look at the number of emails that you have sent. That is not necessarily a very telling metric, although it could be if you're having problems and you see that those problems arise when the number of emails that you're sending is really large. That might be a telltale, but for the most part, this is maybe not one of the most exciting or insightful metrics. Another thing that you can look at is more technical aspects like bounce rates. Now, bounce rates, when it comes down to email and text messaging, means that you send a message to either an email account or a telephone number, and the message did not get delivered. And there are two types of bounces that can happen. Soft bounce, that's when, for whatever reason, maybe the server is down, right? And or maybe their inbox is full, and because of that, you get the message bounce back. Now, those are less of a problem because probably that's a situation that is going to get corrected over time, right? The server will come back online, and or they will clear their inbox, and then they will receive the message, right? On the other hand, there are also hard bounces. That's when you send a message, and what happens is the message is undeliverable because maybe the domain associated with the email address doesn't exist at this point. Companies go belly up, and when they do, sometimes people that used to have email addresses with one email service provider, now that email service provider has disappeared, right? Now, if your bounce rates are probably between 2 and 5%, you probably don't have a huge problem, okay? But as you approach 5%, you should start wondering why, right? Now, of course, this is highly dependent on how you get the list, okay? If you grew the list, as I suggested, organically and carefully from your current customers or good potential customers by asking for permission and asking them to opt in, probably the quality of the list is good and the bounce rates are going to be low. Although people sometimes mistype email addresses, and that's why you're going to have some hard bounces, right? But if this percentage is really large, it means that you have a problem, right? And this problem could be many things. One thing that is important that you do is that you clear or you clean your email list and SMS list on a regular basis. What does this mean? If you have an opt-out button or link or call to action, which I strongly suggest you have, and whenever people ask to be removed from the list, you should remove them from the list. I know it sounds scary. It's like, oh, I'm losing my capability to do marketing. But remember, if they don't want the messages, the only thing you're going to do is annoy them. Okay. And you don't want annoyed customers. Okay. Nobody does. Okay. Good. What other metrics are potentially useful? The obvious one is opens, right? And there are a couple different versions of this. You can look at total opens, right? So the same person might open the same email 3 times. Okay? They are all valuable because if they are opening it 3 times, it means that maybe they are thinking about doing something with it. Okay, but they are not all created equal, right? And so because of that, you might consider also looking at unique opens, which will be the number of people that have opened the email. Now, of course, if on average people open the email twice, the total number of opens will be twice as big as the number of uniques, right? So you can consider both. It really depends what you're interested in. If you're interested, for example, in seeing the quality of the message, probably unique opens is more telling than the number of times that it is actually open. Okay, good. Now, what else? Unsubscribes. This is very important, right? If you keep getting people opting out from your campaigns, it means that you're not doing something right. Okay, and if this number gets high, that means you have a serious problem in your hands. Yeah, I think you should look at unsubscribes almost always, right? Good, especially if you're growing your list organically again, and I think you should do that. Okay, pass on rate. Okay, this is a very high level threshold of performance, but in a good way, right? Pass on rates tend to be low, right? The number of people that forward emails, for example, to a friend, right? And it's going to be small usually, right? It requires some effort, right? And they are putting themselves also on the line with somebody that they usually care about, right? So because of that, they are less likely to do it. So because of this, it's a very high threshold performance metric. If you're doing well in this regard, probably the campaign is going to do very well, but maybe it's a little high of a request, right? So you need to understand where you are within the customer journey. If you're interested in looking at advocacy, then obviously this is a phenomenal metric, right? Because it's directly associated with what you're trying to do. Okay, good. What else? You have click-through rates. Now, click-through rates, if you have a call to action, obviously they are very important, right? These are going to tell you in a big picture perspective whether the offer that you're providing is actually worthwhile to the customers that you're providing it to or not. Now, click-through rates usually are defined as the number of people that actually click in the link out of the total number of messages that you have sent, okay? At least they have not bounced, right? That were actually delivered. And now that is telling, but a more telling metric that I really like is click to open ratio, right? So this combines number of opens and number of clicks. So what that does is it's in a way telling you the quality of the offer, right? The question or the subject line that you use was sufficiently enticing for people to open the message, but the click to open ratio is going to tell you how many of those that opened the message actually went ahead and clicked. So that's going to talk to you more about the quality of the offer instead of the quality, for example, of the subject line. And this is how you get into playing with the metrics so that you can uniquely identify the source or the issue that you're dealing with, or you match your metrics to what the goal is for the campaign. And finally, after you have the metrics, one thing that you should strongly consider doing is some testing. What do I mean by testing? Well, essentially the idea behind testing is instead of sending the same message to everybody, whether it's an email or SMS, why don't you create 2 groups? Let's say that you have 2 different subject lines, right? One is a question about your product and the other one is a limited promotional offer, right? You don't know which one is going to do better, right? So what you do is, maybe randomly, right? You select a group within your list, right? And you select the rest of the people within your list that you were going to send the email to, right? Assuming that you're doing some customization in the selection, right? And after you have those two groups, you choose the different subject lines, and then you look at the results separately, right? And you can look at whatever metric you're interested in. For example, in this case, a good metric will be unique opens, right? So if that's what you're looking at, the comparison between these two groups is going to tell you which one of those subject lines works actually better. And that's going to give you a strong hint for what to do in the future. All right. So this idea of testing or A/B testing, as you will find mentioned later, it's very, very, very powerful. Right? You need to understand that most companies online do hundreds, if not thousands, of A/B tests over the year. So you can tweak slowly your marketing strategy by getting some empirical feedback about what works and what doesn't. So instead of guessing what's the best, what you do is you test it. So testing is a very, very powerful tool. What can you test? The answer is almost everything, right? We've already talked about subject lines, send times, I've talked about it. And when I say send times, dates as well, you can compare, right? And the layout of the message, the tone of the message, whether you use text or you use images, and if you use images, what kind of images work better, right? Any issues that deal with selecting different people within your list can also be tested, right? You can do some predictive modeling and see which ones do better based on that. Different call to actions you can test. At the end of the day, anything that has to do with direct marketing can be probably tested. And if you keep testing, you will be fine-tuning your tools and hopefully you'll get the most return out of your effort. That's what I have for today.